Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Monday Night TV with the Hudson Valley Squares. There's only a few of us here tonight. It's Happy New Year, everybody. Most of the team is post-holidays, doing other things type of thing. And plus, I think the nature of our topic tonight, which was brought to us by Chris Allo, who now can't make it tonight, but we're going to go on anyway. And Chris, hope you're watching. You can put your stuff in the comments below. But anyway, the idea that Chris had, let me introduce everybody. Here we got Ryan Scow, of course, in the house, and Count Ralphus himself, Ralph Tambora. What's going on, fellas? How are you? Look at that. Whoa, wait, whoa. You got to bring that back up again, Ralph. Keep going. Look at that beast of a style.
Oh, man. I got, Rob, where'd you get that? I got that same mug.
I could have swore I seen you put it up once. I just got this for Christmas. My mother-in-law got it for me.
Oh, yeah. My buddy Craig gave it to me for, I don't even know where the hell he got it, but he's had it one day. He's like, you want this? I'm like, fuck yeah, that thing's cool as shit. Hey, give me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I'll go grab it.
It's like the coolest one.
That is a majestic and quite evil looking Stein. That is, how much, is that a 16 ouncer?
I think it's only like 8 ounce. It's like a regular cup size. It looks like a big Stein on the thing, but it's regular cup size inside here. The cup's not that big. I'm drinking coffee out of it because I got to go to work later. Yeah, that's the same one.
Yeah, it's a cool mug.
Wow.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That is incredible.
Cheers. Mine's empty.
Everybody's got the cool mugs with me. I well, this isn't really a mug. This is a tumbler, but
that's cool though.
Purple and rock. Yeah, I don't have anything that
mug.
Yeah,
this thing's cool as shit. I almost don't use it that often because it's so cool. It's like inside it's a stainless steel so you can use it for anything, hot beverages or whatever, but yeah, it's cool.
And the stainless steel keep things really cold for a long time. So that's actually a great drinking
Oh, it's awesome. It's got this cool goat horn handle. Yeah, it's really it's my favorite satanic mug.
I have another one. Let me grab my other one.
Raffle's got so many props. So while Raffle's grabbing his other one, tonight's topic is all about Columbia House and BMG subscription memberships. Oh my God, look at that. Holy
I think it's cool.
Wow. Yeah, that's something you put up on the mantle and just like let all your guests who come visit the house like, look at this, right? So today we're going to talk about Columbia House and BMG memberships. So for those of you who have been around the block a bit, you might remember, I believe this started back in the 70s. You used to see advertisements in like the TV Guide or Time magazine or newspapers or wherever where you could buy like 10 or 20 LPs or cassettes or 8-tracks for like $1 or a penny or whatever, and you join up and you have to buy X amount over a specific period of time. I think it's like 2 or 3 years. I don't even remember exactly. And in the 90s, when CDs became really popular, the whole Columbia House and BMG thing got reinvigorated again, and people were just snatching up CDs left and right. So here you can see some of the ads from back in the day for, what do we got here? Any 11 records or tapes for $1. Free, any 3 12-inch Columbia records for $1. 13 records or tapes for $1. What else? Where's the CD one here? 12 hits for a cool penny. 13 records. Any 8 CDs or 12 cassettes for a penny. 12 CDs for the price of $1. How can you pass up this stuff? I mean, it's just like, I remember I used to see these and I'd be like, wow, so I can get all sorts of shit for next to nothing. When I would go out, I would have to go out to the store and pay like, $10 or $15 per each. It's a deal you can't refuse, right? Well, maybe we should have refused them. So I've asked the guys to kind of think about some stories about when they got hooked in here into these things and how long they were a member and how they kind of dealt with it. And so Ryan is interesting because Ryan's a little bit younger than Ralph and myself, and he probably just started getting into the music at the height of the Columbia House and BMG club in like the 90s or the mid-late 90s. And I remember that's right around that. I think it all ended at the end of the 90s. So Ryan, why don't you talk a little bit about when you first started partaking in these little clubs here?
All right. Well, I tried to put all dates to this stuff, and I don't have that magical Chris Allo memory of remembering exactly when stuff happened. But basically, I was just getting into it, so it was the mid '90s because I'm 40 now. And actually, I had to look up when this ended. So BMG bought out Columbia House sometime in the early 2000s, like 2004 or 5, I think, and then the whole operation just ceased by like 2008 or 9. And that was the end of it. So you're talking like mid 90s when I got into it. And what happened to me was a friend of mine, we were having a conversation, and they kind of like, I think we were young and stupid, so nobody really knew how this worked. They're like, oh, they were just talking about some bands we liked and some stuff I wanted to get into. And of course, at that age, I was still young, so I didn't have a lot of music and didn't have a lot of money at that point, because I don't remember if I had started working yet. I might have been like 14, 15, like just before, or maybe started my first job. Memory's a little hazy, but it doesn't matter, because my first job, I worked at a grocery. So I worked at ShopRite, which is a local grocery store, which a lot of people in this area started off at. And it was like $5, $4, $6 an hour. It wasn't a lot of money an hour. So I didn't have a lot of money. So they're like, oh man, I'm going to sign you up for this thing where you get all these albums for like nothing. And I'm like, well, that sounds fucking cool. So I did. And I was really, this is what sucked, is I was really trying to remember what albums I got in that initial wave, because I got some albums in that initial batch of like, albums. I think it was a penny a CD, and these were CDs when I got in. Some of my favorite albums of all time came in that initial batch. Like the first Megadeth album I ever bought was Rust in Peace. And this CD came with that initial batch. And I remember putting this on here at Holy Wars, and I'm like, yep, that's good enough for me. I love this. New Manufactured by Fear Factory, which to the day is really the only Fear Factory album that I love. And I couldn't find this CD anywhere. So kind of irritates me when I misplace something. A little nuts about that. I already had an album from this band, already at KSAD, but I got Beneath the Remains, which I'd say is probably my favorite Sepultura album. So that came in that initial batch. Love it to this day. And I was already a huge fan of these guys, but I was only into them for a little while. So I got South of Heaven too. So, there was, and I try to remember some other albums I got, because I came across a lot of albums that way. And man, I can't, my memory just sucks, but some of them stood out. Like I distinctly remember getting these albums in that first batch. But then, it's like, it doesn't, you have to buy albums from them at high cost. So that, a CD for a penny is kind of a, get you in there. And I was like 15, 16. So I remember big arguments with my parents, especially my mom's like, well, how do we get out of this? And you really can't, once you're in, you're kind of stuck. And I ended up that I couldn't get out of it. So, I was only in it for the one, however long it was, 2-3 years. And I remember my mom was like, when it's done, it's done. Because I remember calling them up and all this shit. She was yelling at me. And I didn't know. I was like 16. The same friend that signed me up for this, I also remember, this is the kind of intellect we're dealing with here. Although this worked out in my favor, because I like these albums. He went on, I remember we were hanging out at his house once. It was like 3 a.m. and had some advertisement on QVC for like, buy all these cool swords for like $200. Of course, they were like pieces of shit. Like, they were made out of metal, but like they were sword in the loosest sense. You hit them on one thing and they break. So he bought like $200-$300 of these swords, and they were just shit. And he used his mom's credit card, and it was a whole thing. So, but yeah, he signed me up for it. So what I do remember is that every month, see if I get this right, they send you an album. There was like the album of the month that you didn't really have a lot of say on. So you just got an album in the mail. And I remember most of them sucked. I only remembered one of them that I got kind of like, it was a band I hadn't really heard of at the time. I heard of, but I wasn't really into. And you know what? I think it's a great album. It's still my favorite album from them. And I listen to it all the time. And that is Slave to the Grind by Skid Row.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they sent me that. And I'm like, all right, this is, wasn't really on my radar. And I think it's fucking great. And the only other album I remember getting, because there was something about it that was ridiculous, was they sent me a album from the band Biohazard, whose earlier stuff is like more, iconic New York hardcore. But this was a 1999 album, which I guess was right at the end when I was getting out of it. So I'm guessing, I'm going to put the time from here, like 90, I guess like 97 to 99, 96 to 9, somewhere in there. It was called New World Disorder, and it was a edited copy with a little PRMC sticker on it. And I remember there was like, it was like that classic New York hardcore. So he cursed a lot. So it had these loud, obnoxious, jarring like beeps, like in the middle of the album. And it was
those.
I was thinking about this today, and I'm like, man, why would you I don't know why you would ever do that on an album, because like the album or not, it fucking ruins the shit out of it. Because every time he says like motherfucker,
you can't listen to something like that, right?
No, you can't. It was like mother beep or like loud as shit, and like real. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I probably threw that in the trash 20 years ago, but yeah, I remember having several arguments with my especially my mom, because she's like, how do you get signed up for this? What is this? Because stuff just starts arriving in the mail. Then you're obligated to like buy stuff at high cost, like $25 a CD or whatever it was. It was way more than you would normally spend. I still think I came out ahead with like all the cheaper ones, but yeah, then once they got you, they got you. But yeah, you couldn't get out of it. I remember because I was too young to like. I never make any of the phone calls, but I remember her arguing with them, and no, I was in there, and I really wish I could remember more albums I got from them. But you know what? Just for getting Rust in Peace and South of Heaven, yeah, it was worth it. Sure, I got those albums anyways because I was already getting into this stuff, but I'll take South of Heaven for a penny. So.
Well, that's what this was good for. It was good for loading up on stuff you hadn't bought yet, but kind of wanted, and even stuff that you like, you were kind of on the fence about getting, but now because you can get it for a penny, like you're like, oh. But then the issue becomes then when you have to start buying the regular price stuff. That's where the problems always come here. Ralph,
I remember it was expensive, and I remember it too because I feel like it was at the cusp of me having money, not having money, and I remember there was some months. This is vague, but I do recall having to like ask my mom, like, I'm getting this thing in the mail says I have to buy something, and I'm like 15 or 16, or I was young. I don't have a lawyer, I only have $100 to my name, so I think at some point she's like, "Nope, you better pay for it." But yeah, I remember some arguments over that, like light arguments. Not really, it wasn't like a heated thing, but yeah, definitely was a thing where I got roped into it, where it's they're letting kind of like young idiot teenagers sign up for this shit without really knowing better. Because when my friend signed me up, he had no idea that it was like, oh, you get all these CDs for $1, and that's all he thought about it. And I'm like, I didn't know it at all. So I'm like, all right, that sounds cool to me. Yeah. Without reading any of the fine print. So they saw 2 rubes, or they saw him as a rube, and boom, they got him. But yeah, I had some good albums out of it. So I really wish I could remember more, but it's so long ago. Like I don't have any records of like the person I'm talking about. I haven't even talked to him in like 20 years for other reasons. But it was like a high school friend. But yeah.
Well, if he's watching, he's like, I was the dude. That was
it. But you know what? Even this is a cool album. So this showed up, and I put it on. This obviously, Monkey Business and Slave to the Grind. The second song, I'm like, yeah, this fucking rules. So boom, just everything else I remember getting like the free, or not the free, but the CD you had to get every month that they would send you. I don't remember anything else being good. But
yeah. Well, I don't remember if they like kind of like tailored the picks of the month to your buying history or not. See, I don't know if they were doing that sort of thing back then.
They were when I did it, because I didn't get any everything I got was like metal or some heavy music.
Not me. So that's why I think that as the 90s kind of wore on and into the early 2000s, I think they changed that up a little bit. Probably because there was more computer technology to do all these algorithms and stuff like that. But even that was in its infancy, right? So I don't know. Ralph probably has different stories as far as that goes. I definitely do as well. So Ralph, your take on this whole thing.
Yeah, so I think when I did it at 12 years old. I was in 6th grade. You couldn't avoid the ads for it in every single magazine. They were
comic books, right, everywhere, right?
And all my friends were doing it. And so I did it at 12 years old. And I was just getting into like collecting music. I didn't have no money. I had a bunch of Kiss albums, and that was about it in my collection. And when I did it, it was cassettes. I went with the cassettes. I thought it was a little cheaper or something if you had to buy them, like compared to the vinyl. I wish I would have did it on vinyl, but one of the things that Columbia House would do is they rented the rights to the masters or something, so they would print their own copies up. So you wouldn't get any inlay stuff. You would just get a plain cover. Would be on the inside would be blank. There would be no song titles or anything, but it would look like a regular album or CD or cassette, but it was like a cheaper version of it. But my first 12 that I got, like I remember I didn't even know 12 heavy metal bands. Like I was like looking through the list and being like, ZZ Top, that sounds metal. So I got Eliminator, I remember getting, But I mean, this was like the start of my first of everything. I got my first Iron Maiden through Columbia House. I got my first Judas Priest. I got AC/DC and Black Sabbath. But then I was 12 years old. I started getting the album pick of the month. I never sent in the stamp to get my own pick and pay for one. After like 3 or 4 of them, they said, hey, you got to pay for one of these. And my parents, like Scott, had to get on the phone and be like, this kid's 12 years old. He didn't sign no contract and everything, So I got out of it. I didn't have to pay nothing. I ripped them off, but I'm glad they got ripped off, because they ripped off the artist big time. When those 12 free ones that they gave, the bands never got any royalties to them. it would count towards their platinum and gold record sales, but they never got anything for them, and neither did the record labels. And when the record labels would complain about it, they would say, okay, well, just drop your stuff. And they didn't like that because they liked the distribution that they were getting. So they just went along with it. So it was a crazy scam. So then when I was 13, I signed up again. This time I used a different middle name. And that shows about the computer, like you were saying, the algorithms. They didn't have none of that back then, because they would have said, oh, this is the same address that the last time that kid didn't pay. So I did it again. I got another 12. And I went through the same deal. I mean, this time I knew a few more bands that I wanted and everything, but now my collection's up to 24 cassettes, you know. Then when I turned 14, I did it one more time. And my parents this time said, if we get another bill in the mail because of your stupid Columbia House bullshit, that's it. We're throwing all your cassettes away. So that's when I finally stopped doing it, you know. But yeah, that was an important part for me building my collection and finding new music. And you know, I'm glad I did it. And I was doing a tiny bit of research on Columbia House, and it turned out there was people. This one guy, he amassed 26,000 CDs when he was doing it. He had over 500 different accounts.
Wow.
If you go on YouTube and you put in Columbia House, there'll be all these different stories. Somebody else did it and they had 22,000. And what they would do is they would just get the most popular stuff and then sell them at stores and flea markets and stuff. So these guys were making a career out of fucking Columbia House, you know. But when you think about how all the bands got screwed and all the record labels got screwed, it's like, yeah, good that some people screwed them too, you know. But yeah, I remember getting, like, you know, in 1983 or so, I'm getting into Black Sabbath. So we sold our souls for rock and roll. I get Live Evil. Then it's like I get in Heaven and Hell. Ozzy's putting out Speak of the Devil, and Born Again is coming out. And I'm like, this is all like Black Sabbath, but it was like, I was so confusing at the time to be getting into Black Sabbath at 13 when I'm going to be 53 next month. So, you know, I was getting it all kind of at the same time. And it was like, now who's singing on this one? And, you know, it took me a while before I finally started figuring out who the hell everybody was, you know, but it was just a really weird time to discover Black Sabbath, you know, because there was so much all happening at the same time. And as soon as you got into the Born Again, all of a sudden the Tony Iommi's, featuring Black Sabbath, featuring Tony Iommi Black Sabbath comes out, you know, so it's like that made it even more confusing. But yeah,
they didn't give a lot of information, like in the ads. Like you really didn't know who was on it. It's just lists and lists of albums.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, it's a Black Sabbath album. I don't know when this came out. I don't know who's on it. Here's the cover.
Oh, yeah.
Like, okay, I don't have it, you know.
That was in the 90s too. It was just a big list of CDs. And,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, you kind of had to. I mean, the internet was in its infancy, so there really wasn't a lot of information still, you know, unless you had like a magazine or something like that. But yeah, I just remember picking around like, oh, this sounds cool. You know, I'll take that.
And Ralph's talking the 80s here. So it's really, there's nothing at all. So like, unless
there were little like pamphlets that would open up and it would just be listed. I remember in the 90s, they had like the stamps that you'd put the little stamp of the album cover, I guess, and that's how you did it. But I didn't bother trying to do it again later on because I knew it was a ripoff the way. And I remember I would get like something like Pat Benatar. I remember getting as a pick of the month, and I was like, all right, you know. But then most of the times it was like Prince and stuff that I didn't like at all, and I would just like either give it away or throw it away. I wouldn't even like try to send it back because that costs money to send it back, you know. Yeah. And, but yeah, that was a big part of my getting my music collection. And after the third time I did it, I got a paper route, and then I started just buying my own. I didn't try to rip them off anymore, but that was it. I was hooked and had to keep going.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I'm looking at these, and I mean these are all legitimate copies. You know, there's the Sepultura. You know, it's old Roadrunner, Road Racer. You know, it's got the Stop the Madness, Don't Do Drugs, Stay in School, you know, Smokey Bear.
You know what? I don't know about with the CDs, but I know with the vinyl, they wouldn't have inserts, they wouldn't have posters. The cassettes would just be plain white. But I didn't know about the CDs later on. And
the CDs on the back, the CDs would either say distributed by BMG or Columbia House. It would have like a little stamp on the back, but everything else was legit. But they always had that on there, like a little white, not really a sticker, but almost like a stamp on it.
Manufactured by Columbia House, yeah. It does say Capitol Records, but yeah, it's oh, yeah. But you know what? The Slayer and the Sepultura ones don't say it, so who knows? I haven't even thought about that in like forever.
I was gonna look through and like try to pick out cassettes that I still have from that time, and I went in my garage where I got all my cassettes, and I was just thinking, now this is gonna take forever trying to figure out which ones came from Columbia House, and I was just like, ah, fuck it.
Yeah, that's why I didn't pull any, because I'm trying to remember. Like, I got so much and I got rid of a lot. I mean, which I'll talk about now in a second. But yeah, I couldn't remember exactly which one I got, or which ones, because I did this. I see what's interesting about my story is that I started with both of these companies in the early 90s. So right around the time where everything was switching over to CD and I fully switched over to buying CDs, I started seeing, I would get these things in the mail, right? It was coming this like packet, right? Columbia House would have like the whole brochure, and then you had your order sheet, like Ralph mentioned, the little stamps. So every album in the brochure had like a little stamp, and you'd take it off and you'd put it on this stupid fucking sheet, and then you would mail that into them to get you 12 CDs or however many. I mean, so I think I started off with Columbia House in the very early 90s. And again, I was trying to build up a CD collection. So I was like, all right, so I'm going to replace albums, that I've had before, cassettes that I've had before with the CD medium and all that. So I would just order all this stuff. And then I would, the big pain in the ass for me was that they would send you a card in the mail. Once you've gotten your initial batch of freebies. It really wasn't free. It was like each, it worked out to be like a penny each, but then shipping and handling was like $18 or whatever. So you're like, all right, whatever. I'm still getting 20 CDs for next to nothing, right? And then you would get like these cards from them in the mail. They'd be like, oh, the pick of the month is such and such. Mail this back before the 30th of the month if you don't want it, or if you do want it. If we don't hear from you, we're going to send it to you. And half the time, you're not reading this shit. You're just like, oh, yeah, I'll respond to that. It gets thrown in the garbage, or you just never look at it again. And then all of a sudden, bloop, it shows up in your mailbox. And you're like, I don't want this Janet Jackson CD. Why did they send this to me? Oh, shit.
And they charge you for that, too. That wasn't
free. They charge you for it, right? And then it's like, and then so, I mean, how many times did you like plead with them to, I don't want this. Can I send this back? I'll pick something else, So there's always that. But then when I got sick of that happening, I was actually trying to be organized and consciously pay attention to it. I'd be like, all right, so I got the 20 CDs I really wanted. Let me see what else they got. And I'm looking through all this list of stuff. I'm like, ugh, nothing here looks of really of interest. Oh, I guess I'll order that Black Crowes Greatest Hits or whatever. So you order that, and it's like $17.99 plus like $8 shipping and handling. So you're paying like almost $30 for one CD. So then all of a sudden, because you got to buy 5 within like whatever it was, 2 or 3 years, I found I was buying shit that I really didn't want, because all of a sudden there's nothing else listed on here that I really want. So I just started buying things that I was remotely interested in just to buy it. And this was the time of like grunge happening, right? So grunge was all the rage. And so I'm buying all right, let me get this Seattle band, that Seattle band, that Seattle band. Within like a year, I'm like, why the fuck did I buy all this stuff? I don't give a shit about any of these albums or these bands, right? So then I'm like, what do I do? So then you take the CDs and you march down to the local record shop and like, yeah, I'd like to sell these off. And he's like, these are all Columbia House things. Like, all right, I give you $2 a piece for them. I'm like, oh God, I spent like $30 for that with shipping, right? So you wind up doing that. But then because you're a kid and you're stupid, right? Well, I was a little bit older than a kid at this point. I was in my 20s. All of a sudden it's like, oh, now there's this company called BMG. They're kind of doing the same thing, but they're offering 30 for $1. And I'm like, oh, let me see if I can find stuff in there, because of course you can't pass it up, right? You're like, this is too good to be true. So I go look, I'm like, all right, okay, there's a couple jazz CDs I can get. I guess I'll get that stupid Red Hot Chili Peppers CD. I don't really want it, but I'll get it anyway. It's only going to be $1 or a penny, right? And then you get a couple cool metal things. You get a couple of this, couple of that, right? Get a couple classic rock things you really don't want, but you're like, oh, but everybody says it's a great classic rock album, whatever. So then you get your big batch of stuff, and you're looking through, you're all excited, and you look at what you got, and you're like, there's a lot of crap in here, but I hardly paid anything for it, right? But then you still got to buy 5 more at ridiculously high prices. And I did this like 3 times in the 90s. At one point, I'm like, when am I going to fucking learn? It's like, why am I doing this? And you know what? At one point, it was like the late 90s, and I was looking at my CD collection, which was growing leaps and bounds. And I'm like, man, I got a lot of shit here that I never listened to. Why did I buy this stuff? And then I'm looking through it. I'm like, half of this stuff is all the Columbia House and BMG stuff. I bought all this stuff that I never listened to. And I remember getting rid of so many CDs that I wound up getting in these big batches, just because you can't not get enticed by the whole allure of 20 CDs for a penny or 30 CDs for $1, whatever it was. It's like, for me as a collector, it was impossible to stay away from that stuff. And I did it 3 times. And I can't tell you how many shit albums I bought at ridiculously high prices just to fulfill the membership. And I never screwed them. I always wound up buying what I needed to buy, but and then forgetting to send the card back. And it's just so clunky. I got to go remail this thing. And then all of a sudden something arrives and you open it up. You're like, oh, I don't want this. It's like, I don't want the new Mudhoney album. I don't want the new, whatever was popular back in the 90s. They're all crap music that I could care less about. So it wound up, I wish I had like a great story like Ryan tells about how he's got some seminal albums that still are his favorites to this day. I think for me, I got probably some that I still like a lot, but I think if let's say that overall I amassed 75 CDs through these. Yeah, maybe it's not quite. I bet you if I still have 20 of them, it's probably a lot. I bet you a lot of them I just got rid of because I know, like, again, going back to the grunge thing, it's like that was happening at the time. And I remember at first I was kind of like, all right, Soundgarden, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, all right, Pearl Jam, I'll jump on board this. Hey, it's new, it's happening, it's kind of heavy, whatever. But like within a year, I was kind of like, most of this shit sucks, right? And I went and bought like all of those the Seattle bands. And other than like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, I got rid of every one of them, all of them.
I say you got better because with the free, or not the free, well, the opposite of
fucking nothing's free, right? Yeah,
nothing's free. The monthly thing they'd send you, because when I got into it, I guess at the tail end, the beginning out of it was just as like that new metal was really starting to blow up. So even though they kind of catered it to like, oh, you're buying like, Sepultura and, Fear Factory albums, what's the album of the month? It was like, I just think, now that I'm thinking about it, I do remember getting this band called Stained with a D on the end.
Yep.
Terrible. I'm sure somebody else is going to be like, I can't believe you're, whatever. Fuck, terrible. They sent me that first Stained album. And there was a point, because I like the same thing. I've kind of gone through my collection over the years. I still have a billion fucking albums, but, I definitely sold off huge batches of them. When I moved a couple of years ago, I took it as an opportunity to get rid of like 1,000 CDs. I still have 8 billion. But yeah, at some points, like years ago, I'm going through, I'm like, man, why do I have again, I never liked any of the new metal shit. But it just worked out because of Columbia House. Like, I think I had the first Limp Bizkit album, and I'm like, why the fuck do I have this? Like, I'd rather get kicked in the face by a horse than listen to this shit. But it must have been a Columbia House thing,
Probably, right? Yeah.
I've had that amnesia where it showed up, and just one day it's like, whoa, and it shows up in my collection, But the Stained, I do remember getting that. I put it on, I'm like, this is like, I'm not a really big fan of like Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, but I get the, great guitar playing, singing. Just personally, it's not my favorite stuff, but I totally get the appeal of it and why people love it, 100%. But I put that album on. I'm like, this sounds like dollar store Alice in Chains. It is just fucking abominable. And yeah, I remember. I think some of that stuff I just threw out. I'm like, I'm not even gonna sell. I just threw it in the trash. It was so irritating. But yeah, it is cool though, like you said, that I got into this when I was just starting out. And yeah, just to hear it out like this fucking Sepultura album. I heard this, I'm like, blew my head open. Still one of my favorite thrash albums of all time. And to hear like the Cavalier brothers, because earlier this year I saw them, the two of them, they did this whole album and some of Arise, and it was like being like 16 again. Like, oh my god, it was fucking great. I know Nick, who isn't on right now, but Nick had the same experience. You're like, how's this gonna be? It's been a long time. They come on, they start playing that songs, and I'm just like time warped back to being a kid, hearing that opening riff. So it definitely had value for me. And I don't really think I spent any of my own money, or if I did, it's like first job money. So I don't give a fuck about that. But
you weren't an idiot like me, in other words.
Yeah, and I don't know if I ever would have done it, because I think at that point it was a big thing, but just none of my friends were doing it. Like, it just didn't really work out. I think maybe it had peaked by then, or I don't know, because I remember at that same point, man, I'm really sucking at remembering dates. But Napster was becoming like a thing right at that point too, and I was always pretty good with technology stuff, so I remember getting into that, and like, oh, they can just download this album for free. And there's of course all kinds of pitfalls and bullshit with that, and legal bullshit and people getting in trouble. Thankfully, I didn't, but that kind of dovetail with it at the same time. So it's like, oh, something I really want to check out, but because YouTube wasn't around, you can just download it off the internet for free. Check it out. Okay, this is kind of cool. I'll go buy it. So I always believed in buying shit, not downloading shit and stealing it, but. Yeah,
they say that Napster is the beginning of the end for Columbia House. Once people started doing that, it really killed Columbia House, and BMG or whatever ended up buying Columbia House. But they just were all downhill after everybody started. I mean, people just weren't buying CDs as much anymore.
Right.
And in the 90s, the reason I didn't rejoin Columbia House was because I was so into the underground music at the time that like they didn't really carry those labels on those things. So I would see those lists and there would be like, like they would have some Roadrunner stuff or whatever, but they wouldn't have like the underground shit that I was really into at the time. So I never bothered in the 90s, when that Sepultura album came out. I remember getting it like a month. I got that and Slowly We Rot. Or no, that and Cause for Death, I think, came out at the same time. Pretty sure it was them too. It might have been Slowly We Rot. And I got both of them. And then like 2 months later, Sepultura came to the Rock Palace in Middletown. It was like their first time in America. And they just put that album out and they played this little tiny club in Middletown that had no stage. And I was calling them Sepultura at the time, and we never heard what the word, how it sounded. I actually got invited. I could have went up. They came up the night before, and I think Ed Farsley he brought Sepultura up from the city because they played like the Ritz the night before. So they went from playing the Ritz to playing the Rock Palace the next day with no stage, and I got invited to go up to a Primeval practice, and they're like, yeah, that band Sepultura is going to be up there hanging out. And I was like, yeah, I'll see them tomorrow. I'll go tomorrow. And I passed up hanging out with Sepultura the night before or whatever.
Oh man.
And then like a month after they played the Rock Palace, that show that they played at the Ritz got made into a video for Inner Self. And then all of a sudden, Sepultura went from unknown band to pretty much being like the band behind Slayer and extreme music. Like that one video, that was the power of Headbangers Ball and MTV back then. Because you'd watch it for 3 hours and you might get one heavy video. And that one video, even though it only got played a couple times, that put them into the next level. And they were huge ever since,
Oh yeah, because this shit is, to me, is as heavy as Slayer were at the time, and the earlier stuff too. They were fucking monsters. But
that was always my favorite album by them. I love that album.
Yeah, I love this too, man. But like you say though, like I got into this stuff in the 90s, but I went from like, heard Iron Maiden from the first time, heard Slayer first time. I went pretty fast into like extreme stuff. And like you said, Columbia House had none of that, So it's still cool to get this stuff. And I think I got a couple other, I'm sure I got some other good albums, but I'm really struggling to remember like a lot of it. So it must have been a case where it's like, well, I don't really want this, any of this stuff. But,
I mean, they had plenty of metal in Columbia House and BMG, but it was more the mainstream, the big labels, right, for the most part. I think that's why for a lot of the stuff that I got in the 90s, that I probably wound up keeping was a lot of the prog stuff. Like I started buying like a lot of like 80s King Crimson and I filled in the Rush whatever I needed for the Rush catalog and whatnot. But yeah, you had to keep on top of it, man. Otherwise, some package shows up in the mail. Oh, here's the new Paula Abdul CD. I'm like, fuck. No,
you're on the hook for $25.
Yeah, it's just like, oh man, no good. But yeah, I also bought a lot of like greatest hits collections just because I needed to fulfill the damn membership, and it was nothing else I was interested in. And I've always been hit or miss with greatest hit sets, because if it's a band I kind of like, I buy the hits collection. I'm like, all right, yeah, the hits are cool, but I want to hear the deep cuts, so I go out and buy all the albums anyway. So to me, it's just like it's a waste of time.
A good starting off point, though.
It is a good starting off point, and I guess if you don't pay that much for them, but I can't tell you how many greatest hits collections I've bought over the years that eventually I wound up getting rid of because I actually went then and bought like the rest of the albums anyway, because that's kind of how I am, but I don't know.
I had very few. In fact, I had so few. Like I had the famous CCR one, Chronicle, for years, which I never bought greatest hit stuff. So if I had to put $1 on it, I'd probably say I got that from Columbia House at some point. But I actually talked to you about this like only a year or two ago. I'm like, I love these old CCR songs. Like, why don't I own all the albums? Like, Green River and all that stuff. So I just went out and bought all the albums because now there's some good websites.
And aren't they great? Aren't they great?
They're awesome.
Yeah.
And one website I use a lot, I buy and sell a lot, is Discogs. And if you keep your eyes on it, like you can go on there and like I was able to buy like 5 CCR albums, brand new, in shrink wrap, for like $4, $5 each from one guy. It's all person to person seller. It's not any big vendors, but
and they remastered that whole catalog not that long ago, and those are all great.
I couldn't tell you if these are the remasters, because sometimes if you're looking for stuff on the cheap, it's like take what you can get.
Yeah.
You know, you find one person that's got all the stuff you want for a cheap price. I'm like, I mean, I think I even mentioned this. Like, I bought a whole bunch of Uriah Heep albums, like the late '70s, early '80s ones, except for Abominog. Some of those albums are hard to find now, like Firefly and you know, a lot of that stuff. It can be hard to find. And I bought a whole bunch of them for like $2 each. I'm like, man, this is a fucking steal. Because otherwise, like the next vendor was selling them for like $30 a CD because they're pretty rare and they haven't been reissued. And I get them in the mail and I'm looking at them, I'm like, that's why they were $2 each. And this happened to me a couple of times because they're the Russian bootlegs. I don't even know if they're. I mean, I guess bootleg is a tough word, but tons of albums, like they all have these Russian versions for some reason, and everything in the back's in Russian. But you know what? The audio quality is identical. Like I've done a little side by side. I'm like, am I getting gypped with these? And you know, maybe the booklets are all you know, a little skinny. You know, kind of like the Columbia House. Like there's not a lot of information, but yeah, you know, yeah, it's like you probably can't even see this. Yeah, it's like this is High and Mighty. Like all the text on the bottom's in acrylic. It's all in Russian. And I got a whole slew of Uriah Heep albums. A whole bunch, like my first Megadeth album, Peace Sells Killing in My Business. It's a Russian bootleg. I got a lot of that, but you know.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I bought a whole lot of Rare Earth CDs from a guy in Russia, and I got them in, and they're definitely a Russian label, but they sound great. They sound great and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, all right, whatever. And, you know,
that's your only option, because I've just been a couple times where I'm like, I could pay $35 or $40 for like a super rare old edition because they don't reissue some, because nobody gives a fuck about some of these albums, unfortunately. I hate to say that, but or you get a Russian version for $3. So I'm like, you know what, give me the Russian one. You know, I don't speak Russian, but the music's all the same to me. So
all the same, right? Yep. Cool. All right, Ralph, any last words about mail order CD clubs?
When I was doing a little research, they bring up a thing about in the '90s with the CDs. They used the example of Hootie and the Blowfish. I guess they sold like 13 million albums, but 3 million of them were Columbia House things. So 3 million albums that they didn't get royalties for or anything, but it went towards them getting platinum album. But just like when you think of that context of how much money they weren't getting, you know, and all the other bands that got ripped off. So I'm glad that I got mine and I ripped them off. But
yeah, that's a good point, because I remember like Hootie and the Blowfish. Remember the Spin Doctors? They were another band that was like really popular at the time, and I know I got their CD through Columbia House, and like, you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers and all the grunge bands. I mean, that was when I joined these things. That was some of the shit that was really, really popular. So I was kind of like, well, everybody's listening to this stuff, I'll order it. I got Nirvana Nevermind through Columbia House, and then, you know, like a year later I sold it. But yeah, and did they get, you know, you look at the numbers and all those albums were mega sellers, but you got to wonder how much of that for some of these artists was based on Columbia House or BMG sales, right? Where
it's got to be a lot. But, you know, I've read, you know, not to go off another tangent, but, you know, I've read quite a few things now that Spotify kind of does the same thing. Like, you get shit tons of listens on Spotify, but most of the artists, unless you're like a Taylor Swift level, like multi-millionaire in selling, even if you're just like a pretty famous band, you're not getting any money out of it, you know?
You're very little, yeah.
Somebody's making money because
a lot of old bands don't even want to spend the money to record anymore because they say it's not worth it. They're not making any money. And now I'm hearing complaints about they're not making money touring, even because of all the ways that the venues are screwing them and Ticketmaster things are screwing them. And now they're even having a hard time making money doing that. I mean,
plus, you know, the big venues, they take a cut of merch sales too, right? So
I can never understand it.
If the bands can't make their money out on tour, they're not going to tour anymore. And if they can't make money making music, they're not going to make new music. So it's got to be tough for musicians nowadays, thinking, you know, I can't make new music because no one's going to buy it, or, you know, I'm not going to get compensated for it regardless if they listen to it or not. And if I go out on tour, am I going to make any money doing that either? So why should I even bother, right? It's got to be tough.
Yeah. The underground bands that can record themselves in the garage and put it out as a national release, they could still do it and make a little bit of money on it. But the bands that used to spend millions in the studio, they ain't gonna waste their money on that if there's no return for it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, like I don't know, I'll use like Iron Maiden as an example. You know, they put together that last album. I want to feel like a lot of the Iron Maiden fan base, like being an older fan base, would buy like CDs and vinyl. Like I bought the CD and the vinyl and shirt, obviously everything. But I feel like they'd still probably be able to get by on that. But like maybe a much newer band that doesn't have that kind of like old entrenched fan base isn't going to make money that way. You know, who's going to go buy enough vinyl to make it worth it?
Well, they're definitely not going to pay a ton of money to make the album. So if they don't spend too much making it, then they might make out a little bit, you know. But yeah, so a band like Iron Maiden, they got such a fan base that they're going to want the physical copy. But there's so many bands that wouldn't make that, you know, they wouldn't be in that list of with such a big fan base. So it's just not worth it these days.
Yeah, that's why it's cool if you follow like bands on Bandcamp. You know, they'll go and they'll offer like a digital download of a new release. They may print up, you know, X amount of copies or do CDs on demand. They may have some vinyl available, but it's all very, very limited quantities. But the thing is, they, you know, whatever they pay to have their music up for sale on Bandcamp is, from what I understand, is fairly minimal what they have to pay. So they're not like, you know, they're not, there's not this huge chunk of revenue that they have that's just flying out the door to whoever that they never see, right? So that's why I think Bandcamp is a really, really cool place. And you get all the different formats, right? It's like, well, however you like to listen to your music. It's like, well, I do downloads, they got that there. I buy CDs, they got that there. Or they offer vinyl, I like vinyl, you got that there as well. So I think
that's the one service I use, because like, and every couple of weeks, I know they started doing this in the pandemic. They do a Bandcamp Friday where 100% goes. So I'll usually buy shit then. So say if they're charging $20 or $25 for a vinyl plus $5 shipping, I'm sure normally like Bandcamp takes a cut of that 25. I don't know how much it is. Hopefully it's not too much. I'm sure it's nowhere near as bad as Spotify. But allegedly on that Friday, if you buy like a vinyl from whoever, it'll go 100% to the band. But that's like, there's no major, like, there's no like Sony records, like, you know, like you're not going to find like Iron Maiden, you know, bands like that are not going to be on, or like a new Deep Purple album. That's not going to be on Bandcamp. It's mostly smaller bands, smaller labels, but that's what I'm into. So I buy a lot of shit for them. Like I'm not going to tell anybody what my Bandcamp account is. It doesn't have my name or picture on it. But if you find my Bandcamp account, it's a picture of my dog. There's a hint. I have a shit fuck ton of, you know, these proper numbers there, albums I bought through there, you know. And it's cool too, because you buy an album, you buy a CD or a record, you get the digital copy right away, which you can listen to on the app or your computer. So I'm like, I can listen to the album now, unlimited, you know, and then when I get the record in, I can obviously spin it because that's what I prefer. But it's cool. But I just say one other thing about what kind of sucks now, and I've learned this more talking to some friends of mine who run like smaller record labels, is the turnaround time now for vinyl is out of fucking hand. Like I've had conversations where someone's like, I can send the album to press, you know, I'll send the information out to press in like May 2022, and the CD comes back in a couple weeks, whatever. And if you print a tape copy, because that's big again, tape comes back a couple weeks, it could take a calendar year for the vinyl to come out. So it might be 2023 before the plant ships them back the vinyl records. So you have to, you know, a lot of times now they'll offer the, you know, the CD for sale, and you got to wait a year for the vinyl to come out. That's or correct. If they come out at the same time, that means that album's been done for like 2 years. You know, by the time it was recorded, mixed, mastered, sent to press, artwork, and then it finally comes out on vinyl. Like they finished recording that ages ago. So which sucks, but you know, I guess no one's opening new vinyl pressing plants because
no, they're not. Yeah,
the cost to get in on that, I don't even know if they're making new like machines to do that. You know, so who the hell knows? But
it's all the materials and everything that goes into the manufacturing. I mean, we've been listening to Steve Keeler talk horror stories about waiting for vinyl releases that he's been promised for months on end, and he's like, I still have nothing. And this has been going back to the beginning of the pandemic, right? It hasn't gotten any better.
It's gotten worse. Yeah, when I was told, because they're pulling the guys I know that run record labels, like they pull their hair out over, because these are small labels, they're not like Sony, so they don't have a lot of clout in this. And they say like it takes a fucking year like to get the album back, and then you got to generate interest, and the band wants to tour on it, because vinyl is a big seller now. It's like you want to tour on it, you want to play shows, you want to do record release shows, print merch, all that shit.
If the album comes out at the same time as the CD for the little bands, it's usually such a limited amount that they got to get printed up, because they didn't want to wait a year for so many. They don't want to get stuck with too many left over. So that's why sometimes this brand new vinyl will be $40, and you're like, $40, I can buy 2 CDs for that, you know.
Right.
But it's immediately going to be worth something because it's so limited.
Yeah.
All Out War had recorded last summer for their new album, and it's not coming out until February 3rd. It's because I think they wanted to wait for the vinyl to be ready to come out with it, so it's not just the CDs,
It's some like the only example I can think of is the metal label Season of Mist. They'll release the CD and the vinyl like all at once. They wait for everything to be done. So in some cases, if you know the band, you're like, I know you guys finished recording this like a year and a half ago, and we're still waiting. And it's because the vinyl plants are just backed up like crazy. But like you said, who's going to open up a new vinyl plant? Like who's going to invest millions of dollars?
Yeah.
So we got to wait.
And I noticed a lot of time, like some of the releases that are coming out on, like, say, a Nuclear Blast or a Metal Blade or something like that, a little bit more of a noteworthy label. You'll see like the digital version of the album will be available in March. The CD maybe will hit in August, and then you'll see the vinyl in February of the next year. So it's like this. So, you may, if you're not really keeping a close eye, you may get like a new record and you'll be like, oh, cool, this just came out. And then someone will be like, yeah, I heard that like almost a year ago. It's like, how? Yeah. The vinyl just came out. It's like, oh, but no, the digital was available last year already. The CD came out in the summer. And so now you're seeing all this like staggered releases of all the different formats, which is just absolutely ludicrous. There's no more like everything's available on one date anymore.
Nope. A lot of small labels now, I'm noticing what they'll do is they'll put it out digitally and on CD, and they'll say, you know what, the vinyl comes out when it comes out. It could be 6 months, could be a year. Like when we get it, you'll know about it. Because they won't even put dates on it, because they'll say, oh, you'll have it in 3 months, and then 3 months from there, 3 months, because the labels or the plants will keep delaying it. So, I have a couple 2022 albums I bought on CD. I prefer buying vinyl for my favorite bands, but I'm like, I'm not gonna wait a year to hear an album that I could hear today that I want to listen to. So I'll just buy the CD, and then when the vinyl comes in, I'll get that too, which is,
and that's why the Bandcamp thing is so cool. It's a point you brought up before, which is, let's say, again, it's a fairly obscure band. They've got a new album they release on Bandcamp. You purchase the vinyl or the CD, you immediately get the digital copy in advance of whenever you're going to receive the physical product. So I think that's a cool deal. At least you're getting something, right? You're not having to wait for however long it's going to be for that product to come in.
Yeah, I mean, at work and the gym and stuff, I listen to a lot of music on my phone. So, because I use the Bandcamp app, I have all those albums I purchased through that service available for streaming on my phone. So,
yep.
No, it works out pretty nice. It is a good app. Like, I don't want to turn it into a sales pitch for them, but that's the one streaming app I use, and I've had good experiences with them. And hopefully, I'm hoping that the bands get most of the money, because you can buy shirts and merch through them too, and I've got patches for my event, all kinds of stuff. So I'm hoping they get the money. I haven't heard any bands loudly complaining, because bands will basically say Spotify is bullshit, but it's like, it's a deal you make with the devil. You have to be on it, because people use it, and then it'll be like, I see a lot of times people will comment, well, where's the spot? Why is it on Spotify? Just go buy the damn album. But I get that, but I haven't really seen a lot of people complaining about Bandcamp being rip-off artists. So
no, I've heard nothing but good things from the artists themselves. So that's what you want to hear from. So
exactly, yeah. If they're hopefully some of them will call bullshit if it is bullshit. And I haven't heard that, so hopefully that's not the case. But
yeah, we'll see. All right, so there you have it, everybody. A little discussion of Columbia House and BMG mail order ripoff or whatever, and I know Steve Keeler mentioned to me that he used to get 8-tracks all the time from Columbia House back in the late 70s. I could just picture Steve Keeler getting a big stack of 8-tracks for his car back in the day. So, but yeah, and some little bit of information here on Bandcamp. Like I said, if you haven't investigated Bandcamp, I highly recommend you do. There's tons and tons of great bands on there that have their music featured and for sale, and I think it's just a really good place to go. I can't tell you how many times like Ryan and I have like shared notes on bands that we found on Bandcamp, and it's very easy to go and listen to stuff, get a feel for what the music is before you decide to buy or whatever. It's just a really, really cool place.
I will add one thing with speaking of Bandcamp, the way I find a lot of new stuff, like sometimes I'll set aside like an hour or two, because you could search for stuff on there, or bands will link right to their page. But if you go on a album page or a band page for Bandcamp, there'll be a list on the side of everybody that's bought that album. You see like little avatars, little pictures, whoever you pick for yourself. And you can click on any of those individuals and you can see everything they bought, because none of it's private. I don't think there's an option to make it private. I don't know why you'd want to. But, you just feel like, oh, there's somebody with a cute dog. So you click on that and a big list comes up. And so there's not a lot of information. Just basically you get album cover and like maybe people write a little blurb. but you can just kind of like click through and go down like a rabbit hole, almost like YouTube. And I found all kinds of cool shit, like in bands that are it's digital only or don't really have record deals, like just totally DIY, underground, brands starting out, all kinds of crazy shit. Because I mean, obviously it's common sense, but you go through like, man, there are millions of fucking bands out there. Like, there's so many bands doing stuff that's like the stuff we talk about on the show is like 0.0001% of everything. And just going through Bandcamp, but someone will be writing it down, like, how do you check these guys out? But, I'll come up with a big list. And a lot of times it's not all of it's great. A lot of it's crap or like, I don't need to hear this again. But I found a lot of really cool stuff that's like just totally obscure, cool little bands, like jazz bands, rock bands, pop bands, punk bands, everything is all on this website. They got everything. So I don't know. I've had a lot of fun going down the rabbit hole. And like you said, I'll find, like, check this out. This is a great random prog band that nobody hears about. I'll send Pete you the link, or you'll send me the link. Like, this sounds like Uriah Heep. It's got those great fucking Hammond organs. So that is a great website for, if you like doing that, if you like going down the rabbit hole and just spending an hour or two finding random stuff. It's awesome for that. Really, really good. So I just wanted to throw it.
And I find most of the product that's listed on there is very reasonable as far as the prices go.
The band sets the prices, or if it's a label, the label sets the price. So if they, a lot of metal bands charge $6.66 for the digital download. But I mean, usually it's no one's charging exorbitant like $25 for a CD. Like that's not
it's $10-$12. I very rarely see anything more than that, which I think is really good.
Vinyl's usually 20 or 25, which I don't know, $20 for a vinyl record to me is reasonable. So I haven't felt like there's a lot of rip-offs going on there.
Yeah, pretty cool. So everybody watching, put some of your experiences with Columbia House, BMG, and even Bandcamp. I'd love to hear people talk about how much they use or don't use Bandcamp and why. So put the all down in the comments below, and we'll see you all back here on the Hudson Valley Squares in 2 weeks. Should have a good chunk of the rest of the crew back, so stay tuned for that. And visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time.
All the damn time.
Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do click on the like button before you leave as well. So thanks for watching, everybody. For Ryan Scow and Ralph Tambor, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good rest of the week, everybody. See you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.